Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me again Daniel McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks so much for having me back, Jay.
Always good to talk to you, although the topic matter is very concerning most of the time because our government is very aggressive in what it's doing overseas. It seems not to have paid too much attention to the Constitution of the United States, the ideas of our founding fathers for a limited government. In fact, our government seems to be getting more and more aggressive overseas all the time, and within our borders too, as far as that goes. But that's what we like to talk to you about more is the geopolitical issues and America's foreign policy. So I'd like to start by asking you to talk a little bit about a feature article on the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity today, titled "End Torture, Shut Down the CIA" by Ron Paul. Tell us, give us the contents of that, if you would. Tell our listeners what Ron is saying here in this article.
Sure, it's really interesting. You know, this European Court of Human Rights discovered or found that Poland was guilty in allowing the U.S. to rendition prisoners that had held who are now in Guantanamo. They were renditioned to Poland, where they were subject to torture by the CIA. And so the European Court has ruled that Poland has to pay each one of these two gentlemen somewhere in the neighborhood of $130,000.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, here is the U.S. sending prisoners to Poland so that they can be tortured and then ending up in Guantanamo. It's pretty shocking stuff.
Well, how can they? What difference does it make? We've tortured people in Guantanamo as well.
That's true. That's absolutely true. But this is the first time that a European country has been found to be collaborating with the U.S. when it comes to torture, and there may well be plenty of others. You know, I've never mentioned this at all, Jay, but I can tell you for the first time once when I was working in Dr. Paul's office. I received a telephone call from someone, and I won't say the country because this person sounded very afraid, but from one of the East European countries, and he was a senior military official, and he said, I need to blow the whistle on a secret facility that the U.S. is setting up in my country that's being used as a torture facility. And, at the time, to be honest, Jay, and I'm ashamed of it now, I honestly didn't know what to tell them to do. I couldn't tell them to go to the authorities. You know,
yeah.
But that always stuck with me that Poland isn't the only one. There were most likely many others. So this is a significant decision by the European Court. And what Dr. Paul wrote about in his column this week was he put that together with this impending release of the Senate Intelligence Committee staff's 6,500-page study on the torture practices of the CIA. You know, which these two things are very, very closely related. And the Senate Intelligence Committee report is supposed to come out in a redacted form, I think in the very near future. And the CIA is in a panic over what might be in that report. As Dr. Paul notes, they're in such a panic that even, if you remember last year, they were tapping into the computers of the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Yeah.
So talk about a separation of powers problem. That's
right.
It. Yeah.
Oh, that's really frightening. But, you know, getting back to the European Court decision, Daniel, I don't think Americans are hearing about this at all.
No, they're not. And to the extent that they do hear about it, the Obama administration says, as Dr. Paul pointed out in his column, well, we stopped doing that in 2009. That's all ancient history. Nothing to see here. Let's move on.
Yeah.
And Dr. Paul points out, let's hope that's true. However, this is the same administration that claims the right to conduct a drone strike on Americans overseas without trial, without charge. So when it comes down the line of torture, you know, being killed by a drone is probably right up there too.
Yeah, I would say so. But all I can say to that with Mr. Obama is, liar, liar, your pants are on fire.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, and it's just not him. It's previous presidents just lied through their teeth for all kinds of reasons. I mean, all kinds of claims, right? Dr. Paul talks about that in the show. George Tenet appeared on 60 Minutes angrily telling the program host that we don't torture people. And then the photos came out later showing that, in fact, America was torturing people in Guantanamo. So, I can't remember the name of the movie, but my wife and I recently saw a movie of in a Malaysian prison, and extremely horrible conditions. And this guy was being held because somehow I guess he had some drugs on him or something, and you don't do that in those countries. And they were going to hang him, and it was just just the conditions of it. But they were torturing him to try to find out who his buddies were, and who was supplying him, and who else might be involved in the drug dealings that were going on. But I just had to think, the kind of conditions, we didn't used to think of ourselves as being like that, but Guantanamo is no day at the beach. I mean, it's a pretty rough place with the pictures you see anyway of it.
Sure. And remember that a lot of these guys committed no crimes, and the U.S. has already admitted that they are not guilty of any crimes. Some of them were denounced by rivals, rival tribes, for various reasons. And so the U.S. knows that plenty of the people that had been held there were guilty of nothing, yet they were still being held and are still being held indefinitely.
We've got laws on our books here called hate crimes. Can you imagine somebody that's being falsely accused, or even if they're of sympathy with Al-Qaeda or whoever, who, by the way, we seem to be in bed with anyway, half the time, and supporting them in many ways. But can you imagine somebody not feeling some hatred for the United States if they were abused like that? I mean, can you imagine hate crimes? Daniel, if I have the wrong thought or I dislike somebody, that makes me a criminal if I speak out about it, right? Yeah. Whatever happened to First Amendment rights, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly the torture of people in places like Guantanamo is doing nothing to make us safe. That's one thing we can agree on.
It's doing nothing to make us safe, right?
No, on the contrary.
On the contrary, the blowback idea. And why is that so darn hard for Americans to understand? I don't know. I can't, for the life of me, is our propaganda machinery so effective, or are Americans so stupid?
Well, I had the unenviable situation today where I had to get my car checked out, and I have to confess I don't watch a lot of television news, CNN or anything, because I think it's just so annoying, and it just seems to dumb me down.
Right.
If I watch it, but I had to sit there and wait for them to fix my car, and CNN was on, and I honestly, Americans are being shoveled this garbage 24/7. It's no wonder that that they're so confused. And it is a wonder that when you see poll after poll, more and more Americans are against intervention, because they're sure getting shoveled a lot of pro-intervention nonsense. It's 24/7. Putin is the new Hitler. Russia's ready to invade.
Right. And Daniel, the things that are being said, though, from your work, that they're absolutely untrue, or at least if they are true, there's certainly it's more of just a guess or an allegation rather than any kind of backing for it to a great extent. Isn't that the case?
What's worse than that, it's just a bumper sticker. I mean, we see it over and over again. They seem to, hopefully they're underestimating their viewership, but everything is presented as a bumper sticker, 5 words or less.
Right.
Just repeat it ad infinitum, and it does stick, and that's why people are terrified that the Reds are under our bed again.
Yeah, it's the same old. It's like. Yeah, I think it was the Nazis that understood or talked about it, or Goebbels, or one of the propaganda guys there, that said, if you can tell a lie often enough and people believe it, then they'll believe it's true. So I think we're being fed an awful lot of fecal matter, quite frankly. As they say, keep all the Americans down on the mushroom farm, and that seems to be what's happening. Well, you wrote an article, Daniel. The National Journal attacked Ron Paul. Tell us about that. What are they saying about Ron Paul? What are they alleging that Ron Paul is Putin's best friend or something like that?
Exactly, and this is such a low. I mean, it's just so typical of what has happened over the decades, really. But as probably some of your listeners know, Dr. Paul's column from the previous week was basically something like what the U.S. media won't tell you about the crash of the Malaysian airline.
Exactly, Daniel, and that's what we talked about on this show. You went over those points.
Exactly, and so for simply Ron Paul writing in his column, why don't we wait until we see some evidence before we blame anybody, any side?
Right.
And for saying that, the National Journal wrote an article, Ron Paul is Putin's new best friend. you know, and it's just incredible. If you go down the article, basically the argument of the so-called journalist Lucia Graves was that Ron Paul is an even more sophisticated propagandist for Putin because he doesn't use conspiracy theories. He sticks to facts. He cautions against taking the word of the government. So he's actually so smooth. He's too smooth. So that's why he really is their best friend.
Oh. Well, shame on him. He doesn't use conspiracy theories. Well, if he used conspiracy theories, that's what they'd like because they can try to debunk them. But if he just approaches it like any sane, rational, objective person would, then he's dangerous, right? Because you know why he in fact is dangerous to these people, because he is searching for the truth, the objective truth.
He calls them out. And here's what this woman, this young writer said. This is a quote. With his cool, dispassionate rhetoric, Paul seems to be just about the best voice for Putin's interests anywhere.
That's, I mean, that's really something.
Damned if you do and damned if you don't. And if you go back, as we talked about last week, you read the article, all they said is don't jump to conclusions. And
right.
Since we discussed that, we have seen really the case, the U.S. case that it was Russia or Russian-backed rebels has certainly, I would say at the least, it has stalled. At the worst, it has fallen flat on its face.
Right.
We're no further ahead a week later than we were a week ago.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible, the media and what is being said, how people are trying to spin the truth. You sort of were asking the question, given all the falsehoods and the propaganda, the over and over and over again, same old, you were saying there's really not much of a mystery as to why more and more people are abandoning the mainstream. I think a lot of it has to do with a younger population that just simply doesn't like television. They like the freedom of the internet. But
you even have a lot of people who call themselves libertarians.
Yeah.
We had an article by my colleague at the Ron Paul Institute this past week. Adam Dick wrote about this so-called libertarian, Austin Peterson, I guess his name is, and he wrote this article saying that Ron Paul is like a Soviet commissar.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, and he needs to stop talking about these things. They really do hate us for our freedoms. And Ron Paul, quote, this is what he said in his podcast. He blames America first. Which is something you would hear from Bill Kristol, or a Michael Ledeen, or one of these guys.
So this guy's not a libertarian.
Well, he says he is.
But we've seen a lot of that in the Republican Party. We've seen, I thought, a lot of politicians coming out and trying to, what would you say, circle the wagon or circumvent the real honest Tea Party people, the Libertarians too. I think the Tea Party. Yeah, I mean, I think the Tea Party, the start of it was really free market economics and limited government. That was the idea of it. And then you see all these neocons that sort of jump on the ship, and they want to be a part of it because they see it's gaining some political.
And what's the most annoying part, which is really irritating, is, and it's even worse when it comes from people who call themselves libertarian. And that's probably why you see a lot of wolves in sheep's clothing. But this idea that he's blaming America, blame America first. And we ran something on the Ron Paul Institute site. He had a great interview, I think it was on Fox News, where he said, "I'm not blaming America. I'm blaming the neocons."
Right. Right. It's not average Americans for sure. It's not. That's not where the evil is coming from.
And especially for so-called libertarians to conflate the American people with the American government, with the U.S. government, is just that's just incredible.
That's totally non-libertarian.
It's totally the opposite of libertarian.
Yeah, absolutely, because each individual is important, and the government is supposed to be here to serve us, not the other way around. That's what our founding fathers believed. Well, people are leaving the mainstream media for whatever reason, and they're going to the internet, they're going to the social media. And you had written another article there. I think this is something that you wrote, Daniel. Fixing facts around the policy. Is the U.S. government manipulating the social media? Talk to us a little bit about that. Is there is the CIA and the government propaganda machine now jumping in and trying to provide disinformation on the social media sites now? Is that what they're up to? Facebook and so forth?
Sure. Well, what's interesting is that the DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, has spent millions and millions of dollars studying how people communicate with each other on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, etc. And according to some different information, including some leaks by Ed Snowden, it turns out that they're not involved in just passively researching how people react, but they're actually posing as posters and putting things out there to see how they can manipulate people's responses. If you remember, a few months ago, Facebook got into a bit of controversy because they were conducting an experiment with their members. I think it was something about posting happy things one day and sad things the other day to see how people would respond.
Interesting.
And people were upset because they felt like that was kind of a breach of contract in a way, or at least social contract, that they would experiment on their customers or their
manipulate
exactly
mind games and so forth. Yeah,
sure. And it turns out that Facebook also has received some grant money from DARPA to conduct these social media research projects.
Good fascist economics here.
Sure. And so what I did in this short little piece is just to simply speculate, because if people have been following the Ukraine situation over the past couple of weeks, this unbelievable woman called Marie Harf, who is a State Department spokeswoman, and honestly, every time I watch her briefings, I think I'm watching a Saturday Night Live skit.
Really?
And she even looks like one of the characters on the show at one point or other in the past 20-some years. But she says over and over, they ask her, well, how do you base your claim that Russia shot down the plane? Well, it's based on social media and common sense. And how do you base your claim that Russia is moving heavy weaponry into Ukraine? Well, we saw some things on social media.
Yeah.
And so if you put the two of them together, that the U.S. Pentagon and U.S. government is doing so much research on how to manipulate social media, and then at the same time they say, well, we're getting this information from social media.
Yeah.
It's like a light goes on.
Yeah.
We don't have to prove it anymore. Someone posted it on YouTube, and that makes it a fact.
Yeah, it doesn't need to come from New York Times, which of course everybody at least on the left side of the political spectrum believes prints all the news that's fit to print goes into the New York Times, which of course is another big lie. But in any event,
or even a satellite.
So now if we see it on the social media, it's the CIA is trying to plant its own stories, or whoever's intelligence operatives. Plant their own stories so that they can use that then as showing, since people aren't watching the mainstream media so much, I guess, huh?
I guess so, and it's a way of it's a way of being able to push your view on things without having to prove it.
And moving into to a different forum where younger people are, so they can manipulate their thinking.
Sure.
Well, it's I don't know where it ends. It just goes on and on. It's a sorry state, but we do the best we can in letting people know what's really going on. Of course, as your friend and mine, Jeff Deist, reminded me when Ron Paul was running for president. He said, "Jay, perception is reality in politics," and I think perception is reality now. It becomes a reality, at least in the minds of people, and therefore they react to that what they perceive to be real. And I don't know. It's a mystery, Daniel. What do we do?
Yeah, well, I hope people will turn to the Ron Paul Institute for alternative information.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do our best. We try to challenge this manipulation of the media, this manipulation of even social media, and we try to debunk a lot of these things as much as we can. And of course, for doing that, we're called anti-American and hate America first. Well, it's so absurd, and we love America. That's why we want to debunk these neocons are trying to lie us into another war, which destroys the American economy. It destroys our moral backing. It destroys everything that we value. We're the pro-Americans. They're the anti-Americans.
Well, that's true. But, as they say, the first casualty of war is the truth. So, and it seems to me the U.S. government is perpetually at war with somebody. I don't know why Americans can feel threatened when it's not Putin that's shutting down the sea lanes or trying to shut down the sea lanes of the Chinese. It's not it's not Putin that's invading Mexico. coming to the United States through Mexico, as we are in the Ukraine. So I don't know, but it's it's a game that's being played by some very powerful interests, and all we can do is keep trying to speak the truth, Daniel. And I know that's what Ron Paul's about, and that's what the Ron Paul Institute is about. And I would say to people listening out there, listening to this show, think about contributing to the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Go there. There's if you go to the Ron Paul, you go to the Institute's website. There's a place and a way to do that. So I would encourage listeners who really feel that they want to support Daniel and Ron Paul and the other people that are there. As Daniel has explained to me, they run on a shoestring budget right now. They're putting out an awful lot of material, but we can do a lot more. They can do an awful lot more, I think, probably if they have more money to get the story out to more people and to publicize what they're doing more. So, Daniel, I want to thank you again very much for coming on the show and helping us understand what's really going on, as opposed to the stories we're given in the mainstream press day in and day out.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Jay, and thank you so much for your kind words.
Look to talk to you again next week. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks.